The night started with tension already hanging in the air, like a storm cloud nobody was acknowledging. Emily had been pacing around the house for hours, trying on dress after dress, mumbling under her breath about how nothing looked right. When she finally settled on a red cocktail dress that hugged her figure a little too well, she turned to me with a half-smile. "What do you think?" she asked, spinning on her heel. It wasn't like her to care this much about what I thought. Emily was always confident, almost intimidatingly so, but tonight she seemed nervous. I told her she looked great because she did, but something about the way she waited for my answer, like it mattered, struck me as odd. The party was for her job, a big, annual blowout her company threw to celebrate the year's successes. I'd been to one before, years ago, and I knew the drill. Overly talkative coworkers, bad wine, and speeches that dragged on far too long. This time, I wasn't exactly thrilled to go, but Emily insisted. "Everyone's bringing their spouses," she said, her tone clipped. "It'll look bad if you don't come." So I went. The event was held at a swanky downtown hotel, the kind of place with glittering chandeliers and waiters in tuxedos passing around glasses of champagne. From the moment we stepped inside, Emily was a different person. Her nervous energy was gone, replaced with this effortless charm that seemed to draw everyone toward her. She flitted from group to group, laughing a little too loudly, touching people's arms just a little too much. I stayed on the sidelines, sipping a drink and watching her. She looked stunning, but something about the way she carried herself felt off. Not just tonight, lately. She'd been coming home late more often, her excuses vague and unconvincing. There was always some new client, some urgent project, some reason. She'd grown more defensive, too, snapping at me for the smallest things. But I wasn't stupid. I'd been holding back, telling myself I was imagining things, that I was being insecure. But there's a moment when your gut stops whispering and starts shouting, and tonight it was deafening. It happened midway through the night, during the CEO's endless speech. Emily was seated beside me, but her phone lit up on the table. She snatched it up faster than I could glance at the screen, muttering something about work emails. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, her expression tight. I watched her, trying not to make it obvious. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just something I have to handle real quick," she said, not looking up. 5 minutes later, she excused herself, saying she needed to freshen up. I waited, staring at my empty glass, my stomach tightening with every passing second. She didn't come back. After 10 minutes, I got up to find her. The bathrooms were empty. The bar was crowded, but she wasn't there either. I walked through the ballroom, scanning faces, but there was no sign of Emily. Finally, I headed toward the cloakroom, figuring she might have stepped outside for air or something. That's when I heard it. Muffled laughter, low and intimate, coming from behind the partially closed door of the cloakroom. My heart raced, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around and walk away. But I couldn't. I pushed the door open just enough to see inside. And there she was, Emily. She wasn't alone. Ryan, her coworker, was leaning in close, his hand on her waist. Emily was giggling, that high, breathless laugh she used to save for me. My chest tightened as I watched her lean into him, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something. It wasn't what I saw, it was how it felt, like a knife twisting deep in my gut, tearing through everything I thought I knew. I stood there for what felt like hours, frozen, my mind racing with a million thoughts but unable to settle on a single one. Then she saw me, her eyes locked on mine, and for a split second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Emily's face went pale, her laughter choking off like someone had hit pause on the scene. Ryan turned, confused, his hand still resting on her waist like it belonged there. I felt my whole body go cold, but my blood was boiling, every muscle coiled and ready to explode. "Well," I said, stepping fully into the doorway, my voice unervingly calm. "This is cozy." Emily sprang back like she'd been burned, pushing Ryan's hand off her, as if that would somehow erase what I'd just seen. "Ethan," she stammered, her voice high-pitched, her hands fluttering uselessly at her sides. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed. A short, bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is whispering sweet nothings to some guy in a cloakroom at her work party." Ryan had the audacity to step forward, his palms raised in surrender. "Hey man, this isn't what you think. We were just don't," I snapped, cutting him off so sharply that he flinched. My eyes burned into his, and for a moment, I thought I might actually hit him. But then I turned back to Emily, because he wasn't the one who'd made vows to me. "What the hell is going on? Emily?" I demanded, my voice louder now, raw with anger. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to come up with something. Anything that might get her out of this. Finally, she blurted, "We were just talking. That's all." "Talking?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "In a cloakroom? With his hand on your waist? You expect me to believe that?" Her expression hardened, her panic shifting into something sharper, defensive. "You're overreacting," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I came in here to grab my coat, and Ryan followed me. It's not a big deal." Ryan, still standing there like an idiot, mumbled something about needing to leave and awkwardly slipped past me, disappearing into the hallway. I barely noticed. My focus was laser-sharp on Emily, who was now glaring at me like I was the problem. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I asked, my voice dropping low. "Do you really think you can spin this into something innocent?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes like I was being dramatic. "I don't know what you want me to say, Ethan. Nothing happened." My laugh this time was louder, angrier. "Nothing happened? Emily, I heard you laughing with him. I saw the way you were all over each other. Are you seriously standing here, lying to my face right now?" Her jaw tightened, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by cold defiance. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it is," she said, her tone clipped. "Why are you even here, spying on me? Do you not trust me, or something?" The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. She was flipping this on me, trying to paint herself as the victim while I was the one standing there, shattered. "Trust you?" I repeated, my voice shaking now. "How am I supposed to trust you when you're sneaking off with another man at a party? God knows what else you've been doing when I'm not around." Her face hardened even more, and she stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air between us. "You know what, Ethan? Maybe if you weren't so damn paranoid all the time, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Do you ever stop and think about how your constant need to control everything pushes people away?" The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, trying to process how we'd gone from her betrayal to me being the problem. My mind was spinning, my chest tight with the weight of everything unsaid. Finally, I stepped back, shaking my head. "I can't do this right now," I said, my voice quieter but no less intense. "I need some air." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out, my hands shaking as I pushed through the crowd and into the cold night air. The city lights blurred in my vision, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't know who I was, or who I'd married. And that was just the beginning. The cold air outside the hotel hit me like a slap, but it didn't clear my head the way I hoped it would. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling with adrenaline. I leaned against a lamppost, staring out at the city's glittering skyline, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march back inside and demand that Emily admit what I already knew. I wanted to tell her how disgusting it was that she thought I'd fall for her pathetic excuses. But most of all, I wanted answers, real ones. Not the twisted half-truths she always threw at me when she felt cornered. For years, I'd trusted her. I'd given her everything. My love, my time, my faith. And now I was standing in the middle of downtown, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. A voice startled me out of my spiraling thoughts. "Hey, Ethan, right?" I turned and saw a woman standing a few feet away. She looked vaguely familiar, one of Emily's coworkers, I realized. Her name was Amanda or Amber or something. She was holding a cigarette, her eyes sharp and full of something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Can I help you?" She took a drag of her cigarette, exhaling smoke into the cold air. "I saw what happened in there," she said, her voice low. My stomach tightened. "And?" She shrugged. But there was something pointed about the way she was looking at me. "Look, I don't know if it's my place to say anything, but you deserve to know the truth." My heart skipped a beat. and I felt the air around me grow heavier. What truth? She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Emily and Ryan, she said finally. It's not the first time they've been like that. Everyone in the office knows. Her words hit me like a freight train. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. What do you mean, everyone knows? I asked, my voice sharp. She sighed, flicking ash from her cigarette. It's been going on for months. Late-night meetings that don't make sense, disappearing together at work events. I mean, they're not exactly subtle. Most of us just figured you knew and didn't care. The ground beneath me felt like it was tilting. My mind flashed back to all the times Emily had come home late, her hair slightly out of place, her excuses rehearsed but unconvincing. The nights I'd stayed up waiting for her, wondering if I was overthinking things. And all along, she'd been playing me for a fool. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice raw. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression softening. Because you don't deserve to be lied to, she said quietly. And because I've seen how Ryan treats women. You're not the first person he's done this to, and you probably won't be the last. The bitterness in her voice made me think she had her own history with him, but I didn't press. I was too busy trying to keep my emotions in check, to stop myself from marching back inside and tearing Ryan apart in front of everyone. Instead, I forced myself to nod. Thanks for telling me, I said, though the words felt hollow. She gave me a small, sad smile and turned to leave, her heels clicking against the pavement. Once she was gone, I leaned against the lamppost again, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Emily hadn't just crossed a line. She'd bulldozed through it, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Couldn't let this consume me, not yet. I needed to confront her, to get the truth out of her once and for all. No more excuses, no more games. Pulling out my phone, I called her. It rang twice before she picked up. Ethan? Her voice was shaky, like she was trying to sound worried but couldn't quite sell it. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Meet me outside. Now. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her scrambling to come up with a reason not to. But she must have realized she was out of options, because she sighed and said, Fine, I'll be right there. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't the calm of acceptance. It was the calm before a storm, the moment when you realize there's no turning back. And I was ready for the storm. The hotel doors swung open, and Emily stepped out into the chilly night. Her red dress glimmered under the streetlights, but she didn't have the same glow she'd worn earlier in the ballroom. Instead, her face was drawn, her eyes scanning the street until they landed on me. She hesitated, then started toward me, her heels clicking on the pavement like a countdown. Ethan, she said, wrapping her arms around herself as though the cold was the only thing making her shiver. What are you doing out here? Can we go home and talk about this? Home. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. What did home even mean anymore? No, I said flatly. We're talking now, right here. She stopped a few feet away, her expression hard to read, somewhere between annoyance and discomfort. Okay, she said slowly. What do you want to talk about? I scoffed. You really think you can play dumb right now? I just watched you, Emily, in the cloakroom, with Ryan. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was trying to decide which version of the lie she wanted to tell me. Finally, she rolled her eyes. I already told you, Ethan, it was nothing. We were just talking. God, why are you making this such a big deal? You were laughing with him, I said, my voice sharp, touching him, whispering to him. And now I know this isn't the first time either. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Amanda, I said, savoring the flicker of panic that crossed her face. She told me everything. How everyone at the office knows about you and Ryan. How this has been going on for months. Emily's expression hardened, her shoulders squaring like she was gearing up for a fight. Amanda's a bitter, jealous liar, she snapped. She's been trying to get me fired for ages. I can't believe you'd take her word over mine. Then why were you in the cloakroom with him, Emily? I demanded, stepping closer. If it's all innocent, why sneak away like that? Why hide? She glared at me, her jaw tight. Because I knew you'd overreact, just like you are now, she shot back. You're always looking for something to be mad about, Ethan. You can't stand it if I'm not glued to your side 24/7. I blinked, stunned by the sheer audacity of her words. She wasn't just denying what had happened. She was turning it into my fault. This isn't about me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. This is about you sneaking around with another man, lying to my face, and trying to gaslight me into thinking I'm crazy. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might actually admit it. But then she smirked, a cold, cruel twist of her mouth that sent a shiver down my spine. You know what, Ethan? She said, her voice icy. Maybe if you weren't so boring all the time, I wouldn't have to find someone who actually knows how to have fun. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, my chest tight, my breath coming in shallow bursts. She was standing there, unapologetic, blaming me for her betrayal like it was the most natural thing in the world. Wow, I said, my voice low. That's it then? You're not even sorry. She shrugged, looking away. I don't know what you want me to say. You've been distant for months, Ethan. Always working late, barely talking to me. Maybe if you'd paid more attention, this wouldn't have happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built a life with, was standing in front of me, tearing me apart piece by piece, and she didn't even care. This is unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You're actually blaming me for your choices, for cheating on me. She rolled her eyes again, like the word itself was offensive. Oh, grow up, Ethan. Nothing happened. You're acting like a child. I felt something snap inside me, a dam breaking under the weight of everything I'd been holding back. Nothing happened? I said, my voice rising. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with Ryan, and now you're standing here, acting like I'm the bad guy? Do you even hear yourself? For the first time, her mask of indifference faltered. Her eyes flashed with something. Guilt, anger, fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I'm not doing this with you right now, she said, turning on her heel. Oh, yes, you are, I said, stepping in front of her. You don't get to walk away from this, Emily. Not this time. She glared at me, her lips curling into a sneer. What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I've been hooking up with Ryan? Fine. There. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, slicing through the night like a blade. I stared at her, the weight of her confession settling over me like a crushing wave. No, I said quietly, my voice trembling. That's the last thing I wanted to hear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city noise buzzed around us, distant and meaningless. Emily crossed her arms, looking away, while I stood there, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. And then, with a coldness I didn't know I was capable of, I said, We're done, Emily. You can have your fun with Ryan. But you'll be doing it without me. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening to protest. But I didn't wait to hear what she had to say. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay. That I walked through the city streets, the cold biting at my skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, replaying Emily's words over and over like a cruel loop I couldn't escape. Maybe if you weren't so boring, if you'd paid more attention, nothing happened. Fine, I've been hooking up with Ryan. Are you happy now? The finality of it hit me harder with every step. 7 years together, and she'd thrown it away like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I don't know how far I walked. Blocks, maybe miles. But eventually, I found myself in front of a 24-hour diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. It wasn't home, but at least it was somewhere. Somewhere I could sit, think, and maybe feel something other than the burning ache in my chest. Inside, the place was almost empty. A lone waitress leaned against the counter, scrolling on her phone, while an older couple sipped coffee in a corner booth. I slid into a seat near the window, staring blankly at the laminated menu without reading it. When the waitress came over, I ordered black coffee and a plate of pancakes. Comfort food for a man who felt like his world had just collapsed. As I waited, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen. Emily. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Part of me wanted to answer, to let her explain, to see if she'd even try to salvage what little was left between us. But another part of me, the part that had been burned one too many times tonight, knew better. I let the call go to voicemail. She didn't stop. Another call, then a text, then another. "Ethan, we need to talk. You're being dramatic. Come home. You're seriously going to ghost me? After everything we've been through? Fine. Stay out all night. See if I care." The last one made me laugh bitterly, though it hurt more than I wanted to admit. The sheer audacity of her, still trying to turn this around on me, like I was the one at fault, like I was the one who'd betrayed her. The coffee arrived, steaming and bitter, but I drank it anyway. I needed something to ground me, something to fill the gnawing emptiness inside. The pancakes came next, but I barely touched them. My appetite had disappeared, leaving only the ache behind. I thought about calling someone, my best friend, my brother, anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Emily cheated on me, felt too raw, too real, like saying it would somehow make it permanent. Instead, I stared out the window, watching the occasional car pass by, wondering how the hell I'd ended up here. And then, as if the universe hadn't had its fill of tormenting me, the door to the diner jingled, and someone walked in. "Ethan?" I turned, and there she was, Emily, still in her red dress, her makeup slightly smudged, her hair a little out of place from the night's events. She looked around the diner, her eyes locking on me with a mix of relief and irritation. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. She strode over to my table, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a metronome counting down to the next disaster. Without waiting for an invitation, she slid into the seat across from me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "I could ask you the same thing," she shot back, leaning forward. "You walk out on me, ignore my calls, and now you're hiding in some diner like a coward?" Her words lit a fire in me I didn't know I had left. "Coward?" I hissed. "You're calling me a coward? After everything you've done tonight? After the cloakroom, after Ryan, after the lies? You've got some nerve, Emily." She flinched, but only for a moment. Then her walls went back up, her face twisting into that same cold, defiant mask she'd worn earlier. "I came here because we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "You can't just walk out on our marriage like this." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've got it backward, Emily. You walked out on our marriage the second you started sneaking around with Ryan. Don't stand there and act like I'm the one who broke us." Her face flushed, and for a moment I thought she might actually apologize. But instead, she leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "You're not exactly innocent in all this, Ethan," she said coldly. "You've been so wrapped up in work, in your own little world, that you barely noticed me anymore. What was I supposed to do? Sit around and wait for you to care?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they only made my anger burn hotter. "So that's your excuse? I worked too much, so you decided to cheat? That's your justification for destroying everything we built together?" She looked away, her jaw tightening, but she didn't answer. "Unbelievable," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "You don't even get it, do you? You don't see how selfish, how cruel you've been. All you care about is yourself." Her eyes snapped back to mine, and for a moment, I saw something raw and vulnerable flicker in them. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the same cold indifference she'd been wearing all night. "I'm not the only one to blame here," she said quietly, almost defiantly. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "You know what, Emily? Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not perfect. But at least I kept my promises. At least I tried." I stood up, tossing a few bills on the table to cover my untouched pancakes. "I'm done talking. We're done. Don't follow me again." For the first time, her mask cracked. Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came out. She just sat there, staring up at me, a flicker of something that might have been regret in her eyes. But it was too late for that. I walked out of the diner, leaving her behind, the cold night air wrapping around me like a second skin. For the first time in hours, I felt something close to peace. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back, that I didn't go home that night. The thought of stepping into the house I'd shared with Emily, of seeing her things, her presence lingering in every corner, made my stomach churn. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, the city's empty streets blurring past me as I tried to piece together what my life had become. It was almost dawn when I finally parked outside my best friend's apartment. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the faint light in his window, debating whether I should go in. I hated the idea of dragging someone else into my mess, but I couldn't face this alone anymore. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. Jake stood there, bleary-eyed and shirtless, his expression shifting from confusion to concern the moment he saw my face. "Ethan?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "Dude, it's... what, 5 a.m.? What's going on?" I didn't even know where to start. "Can I come in?" "Of course," he said, stepping aside. I walked in, collapsing onto his worn-out couch. Jake followed, grabbing a couple of beers from the fridge without asking if I wanted one. He handed me a can and sat across from me, waiting. "She cheated on me?" I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Jake's face darkened. "Emily?" he asked, as if there was any other possibility. I nodded, and for the next 10 minutes, the story spilled out of me in a rush. The party, the cloakroom, Ryan, her deflection, her coldness. By the time I was done, Jake looked like he wanted to punch a hole in the wall. "Man, that's insane," he said, shaking his head. "I knew she could be a bit of a handful sometimes, but this? She's lost her damn mind." "She blamed me," I said, laughing bitterly. "Said I was too boring, too distant. Like that justifies what she did." Jake cracked open his beer, taking a long swig before answering. "That's textbook, man. People like her, they'll do anything to avoid taking responsibility. Twist the knife and make you think it's your fault." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "What the hell do I do now, Jake? How do I even begin to move on from this?" He leaned forward, his voice steady. "First, you don't go back. Not for a second. She made her choices and you deserve better than that. Second, you get a lawyer. Protect yourself, your money, your sanity, everything. And third," he smirked, "you crash at my place until you've got a plan. No way am I letting you face this alone." His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of something other than anger or despair. Gratitude, maybe. "Thanks, man," I said quietly. "Anytime," he said. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and hard conversations. I called a divorce lawyer first thing Monday morning, laying out the situation as calmly as I could. She listened carefully, asking pointed questions about our finances, our assets, and whether or not I thought Emily might try to make things messy. "Messy?" I repeated, the word tasting strange in my mouth. "I don't think she cares enough to bother." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Don't underestimate her, Mr. Carter. Divorce can bring out the worst in people." She wasn't wrong. Emily's reaction when I told her I'd filed for divorce was a masterclass in manipulation. At first, she was defiant, scoffing at the idea that I'd actually go through with it. "Oh, come on, Ethan," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're not seriously ending our marriage over one stupid mistake." "Stupid mistake?" I shot back. "Is that what you call months of sneaking around behind my back?" She shrugged, her tone dismissive. "It wasn't like that." I laughed bitterly. "Then what was it, Emily? Enlighten me." When her excuses didn't work, she shifted tactics. Suddenly, she was the victim. She cried, begged me to reconsider, swore she'd change. "Ethan, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. I'll do anything." But I'd seen behind the curtain, and I wasn't falling for the act. "You already threw it away," I said, my voice cold. "I'm just cleaning up the mess." The final straw came when she showed up at Jake's apartment one evening, pounding on the door until we let her in. She was a wreck, makeup smeared, her hair a mess, but her eyes burned with fury. "You're staying here?" she spat, glaring at me. "Really? Hiding out like some child instead of dealing with this like an adult?" I crossed my arms, refusing to rise to her bait. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to talk," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I want to fix this, but you won't even give me a chance." Jake stepped in before I could respond, his voice calm but firm. "You need to leave, Emily. Now." She turned on him, her anger spilling over. "This is none of your business, Jake. Stay out of it." "It became my business the moment you decided to hurt my best friend," he shot back. "So I'll say it again, leave. Now." She looked back at me, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, please." I shook my head. "It's over, Emily. Go." For a moment, I thought she might try to push further. But then her shoulders sagged, and she turned to leave. As she walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness. But most of all, I felt free. Finally free of her lies, her manipulation, her betrayal. And I wasn't looking back. The first morning after filing for divorce, I woke up on Jake's couch to the sound of his blender whirring in the kitchen. The smell of coffee drifted into the living room, and for a brief moment, I felt something close to normalcy. But then reality set in. My marriage was over. My life, at least the one I thought I'd been building with Emily, was gone. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as Jake walked in with 2 mugs of coffee. He handed me one without a word, then plopped down in the armchair across from me. "You look like hell," he said, grinning. "Feel like it too," I muttered, taking a sip. Jake studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. "So, what's the plan, man? You can't camp out here forever." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. The house is too much of a battlefield to even think about going back. I'll probably sell it, split whatever we get out of it. Start fresh somewhere else." Jake nodded. "Good call. Burn it all down and build something better." The thought of starting over felt equal parts terrifying and liberating. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in the ruins of what Emily and I had built. Later that day, I returned to the house for the first time since the night of the party. Emily wasn't home, thank God, so I had a few hours to pack my things without the threat of another confrontation. Walking through the front door was like stepping into a ghost town. Everything looked the same, but it felt hollow. The pictures on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out together, even the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air. They all felt like artifacts of a life that no longer existed. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbing a suitcase from the closet and throwing in whatever clothes I could fit. My movements were quick, almost robotic, but my mind was anything but calm. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her. The dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner. The bracelet I'd given her on her birthday, lying carelessly on the dresser. The bed we'd shared, now feeling like the scene of a crime. I couldn't stand it. I moved faster, tossing things into the suitcase without bothering to fold them. I grabbed my laptop, my books, anything that felt like mine, and hauled it all down to the car. On the way back upstairs for one final sweep, I noticed her work bag sitting by the door. I hesitated. The bag was half open, and inside, I could see a stack of papers, a tablet, and a sleek black notebook. Emily was obsessive about her notebooks, using them for everything from work notes to personal scribbles. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, but something else, call it curiosity, call it instinct, pulled me closer. I reached down and flipped the notebook open. It didn't take long to find what I wasn't looking for. Page after page of scribbled notes, timelines, and texts. She'd copied entire conversations between her and Ryan, likely so she wouldn't forget what they talked about. Each message was a dagger. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. You make me feel alive in a way Ethan never could. Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one more damning than the last. There were dates, too, neatly written in the margins. Dates that lined up with every late night, every work emergency, every excuse she'd ever fed me. It wasn't just cheating. It was planned, deliberate, calculated. The final straw was a crude little doodle she'd drawn in the corner of one page. 2 stick figures holding hands, labeled me and Ryan, with a heart between them. I slammed the notebook shut, my breathing heavy, my vision blurred with rage, but beneath it, there was something deeper, something colder. This wasn't just betrayal. This was cruelty. When Emily came home later that night, I was ready. I was sitting in the living room, her notebook on the coffee table in front of me, my suitcase by the door. She walked in, her eyes widening when she saw me. "Ethan," she said cautiously. "What are you doing here?" "Sit down," I said, my voice flat. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself into the armchair across from me. Her gaze flicked to the notebook, and I saw her jaw tighten. "What's this?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her. I picked up the notebook and held it up like evidence in a courtroom. "This is everything I needed to see," I said, my tone cold. "Your little diary of deceit. Your love letters to Ryan. Your dates." Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely scared. But then she straightened, her expression hardening. "You went through my things? Don't even try it," I snapped. "Don't you dare make this about me. You wrote it all down, Emily. Every lie, every betrayal, every disgusting little detail." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to read this? To see, in your own words, how little I meant to you? How much of a joke our marriage was to you? Ethan, it's not like that. Don't." I slammed the notebook down on the table, making her flinch. "Don't insult me by pretending this wasn't exactly what it looks like. You're not sorry, Emily. You're only sorry you got caught." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she sighed, her shoulders sagging. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not sorry." The admission hit me like a punch to the gut, but it didn't surprise me. "Not anymore. I'm done," I said, standing up and grabbing my suitcase. "You can keep the house, the furniture, the memories. I don't want any of it. But don't think for a second I'm walking away empty-handed. My lawyer will be in touch." She didn't say a word as I walked out the door. This time, I didn't look back. Leaving the house for the last time was supposed to feel like a release, but as I drove away, the weight of everything settled onto my chest like a cinder block. Emily's words echoed in my mind, sharp and unapologetic. "I'm not sorry." The cold finality of it hit harder than I'd expected. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that she felt no remorse. She destroyed us without hesitation, and I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. How long had she been planning to leave me behind? Emotionally, if not physically? Jake was waiting when I got back to his place, already armed with takeout and a six-pack. He took one look at my face and wordlessly handed me a beer. "So," he said, cracking his own can open, "how bad was it?" I let out a long sigh, collapsing onto the couch. "Worse than I thought." I found her notebook. She wrote everything down. Every message, every lie. She wasn't just cheating Jake. She was cataloging it. He winced. "Man, that's cold." "Cold doesn't even begin to cover it," I muttered, taking a long swig of beer. She looked me in the eye and said she wasn't sorry, like I was the one who should have seen it coming. Jake shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I know it doesn't help right now, but this isn't on you, Ethan. People like her, they'll always find a way to justify their crap. Don't let her drag you into that spiral." I nodded, but his words barely sank in. My mind was too busy turning over the next steps. Selling the house, the divorce paperwork, untangling years of shared finances. It all felt so overwhelming, like trying to dismantle a bomb with no instructions. And then there was Ryan. His smug face flashed in my mind, and my fists clenched involuntarily. He wasn't just some random guy. He was someone who worked with her every day. Someone who'd been in our house, sat at our table. The thought of him laughing behind my back, thinking he'd won something, made my blood boil. "Jake," I said suddenly, setting my beer down. He looked up from his food. "Yeah. What would you do if you were me?" Jake leaned back, his expression serious. "Honestly, I focus on you, man. Emily and Ryan aren't worth your time or energy. Let your lawyer handle the divorce, sell the house, and cut every tie you've got to her." "But," I pressed, sensing there was more. He smirked, a flicker of mischief in his eyes. "But if I did decide to send a message, I'd make sure Ryan never forgot who he messed with." The idea hung in the air, tempting me. I wasn't a confrontational guy by nature, but there was something deeply satisfying about the thought of wiping that smug grin off Ryan's face. "You're probably right," I said after a long pause. But I need to be smart about this. The last thing I need is to give Emily ammunition to use against me in the divorce. Jake nodded, raising his beer in a mock toast. Smart move. But if you change your mind, you know where to find me. The next morning, I woke up to another barrage of texts from Emily. Ethan, we need to figure out what to do about the house. I'm willing to talk things out if you stop being so stubborn. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I deleted them without responding. If she wanted to talk, she could do it through my lawyer. But one message caught my eye. Ryan wants to talk to you. He thinks you're blowing this out of proportion. My jaw tightened, and I nearly dropped my phone. Ryan, the sheer arrogance of it. He thought I was blowing things out of proportion? He thought he could waltz into my marriage, destroy everything, and then sit me down for a chat like we were old friends? Jake noticed my expression as I stared at the screen. What's up? He asked. Ryan wants to talk to me, I said, my voice low. Jake let out a bark of laughter. Oh, that's rich. What? Does he think you're going to shake hands and wish him and Emily the best? I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Jake called after me. To see Ryan, I said, my voice steely. Ethan, Jake warned, standing up. Don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to hit him, I said. I just need him to understand exactly what he's done. Jake sighed but didn't try to stop me. Call me if you need backup. Ryan worked at a sleek downtown office building, and when I walked into the lobby, I felt out of place in my jeans and jacket. The receptionist raised an eyebrow as I approached. Hi, I said, keeping my voice calm. I'm here to see Ryan Carter. Her lips pursed. Do you have an appointment? No, I said, smiling tightly, but I guarantee he'll want to see me. After a moment's hesitation, she picked up the phone and dialed. There's someone here to see you, she said into the receiver. Ethan, Carter. I couldn't hear his response, but her eyes flicked back to me, and she nodded. He'll be right down. I waited by the elevators, my hands stuffed in my pockets to keep them from shaking. When the doors opened, Ryan stepped out, looking every bit the smug corporate climber I'd imagined. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair styled just so, but his confidence faltered when he saw the look on my face. Ethan, he said, forcing a smile. This is unexpected. Not for me, I said, my voice cool. Look, I know things got a little messy, he began, holding his hands up like a peace offering. But Emily and I never meant to hurt you. Stop, I said, cutting him off. You don't get to justify this. You don't get to stand here and pretend you're the good guy. His face flushed, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. You think you've won something, don't you? I said, my voice low and steady. You think stealing another man's wife makes you powerful, like it's some kind of trophy. But let me tell you something, Ryan, you haven't won a damn thing. You've attached yourself to someone who will betray you the moment it suits her, just like she betrayed me. And when that happens, don't come crying to me about how you didn't see it coming. Ryan's smug veneer cracked, his jaw tightening as he struggled to hold his composure. Look, man, I didn't come down here to fight. No, I said, stepping closer. You came down here to save face. But I'm not here for your excuses, Ryan. I'm here to tell you that you'll never matter. Not to me, not to her, and definitely not to yourself if this is how you measure your worth. I turned and walked away before he could respond, leaving him standing there in the lobby, his carefully curated world rattling around him. It wasn't revenge, but it was enough. For now. The confrontation with Ryan should have left me feeling lighter, like I'd finally reclaimed a piece of myself from the wreckage Emily had caused. But as I drove back to Jake's apartment, the weight in my chest only seemed heavier. The thing about revenge, even the kind that doesn't involve fists or shouting, is that it never truly satisfies. When I walked in, Jake was sprawled out on the couch, a game controller in his hands. He glanced up at me, his face a mix of curiosity and concern. Well? He asked. I dropped my keys on the counter and sat down heavily in the armchair. He tried to play it off like he didn't mean to hurt me, I said, shaking my head. Like he and Emily were just victims of circumstance. Jake scoffed. Classic. And, And I let him know exactly what he'd done, I said. No yelling, no punches, just truth. Jake grinned, setting the controller down. Good for you, man. Bet he didn't see that coming. Maybe, I said, leaning back, but it didn't change anything. Emily's still Emily, and he's still a smug idiot who thinks he's untouchable. Jake nodded slowly, his expression turning serious. You're right. It doesn't change them. But it's not about them, Ethan. It's about you. Getting closure. Taking control back. It's all part of moving on. I stared at him for a moment, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I guess. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics. My lawyer was relentless, cutting through Emily's half-hearted attempts to negotiate like a scalpel. The house went on the market, and though it stung to think about strangers walking through the place that had once been my home, I knew it was necessary. Emily tried to contact me a few times during the process, her messages swinging wildly between anger, guilt, and desperation. We need to talk about the house. Ethan, you don't have to do this. We can fix things. Are you seriously going to let some lawyer decide our future? Every time, I forwarded her messages to my attorney without replying. I'd given her too much of my time already. One day, as I was boxing up the last of my things at the house, I found something I hadn't expected. It was a dusty old photo album, buried under a pile of forgotten knickknacks in the closet. Curious, I flipped it open. The pictures were from our early years together. Camping trips, birthdays, lazy Sundays on the couch. Emily and I looked so young, so happy. I could see it in our smiles, the way we leaned into each other like we were the only two people in the world. For a moment, the memories hit me like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. But as I kept flipping through the pages, something shifted. I started noticing the cracks, the forced smiles in later photos, the distance between us in group shots, the way her eyes didn't light up the same way anymore. By the time I closed the album, I realized something important. The version of Emily I'd loved no longer existed. Maybe she never had. And that realization wasn't just painful, it was freeing. The first real sign of peace came on a quiet Thursday evening. Jake and I were sitting on the porch of his apartment, a couple of beers in hand, the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. You know, I said, staring out at the lights, I thought I'd be angrier. Jake glanced at me, one eyebrow raised. Angrier about what? About her. About the whole mess. I took a sip of my beer. But the more time passes, the more I just don't care. She's not worth it. Jake grinned. That's what I like to hear. Took you long enough to get there. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah. Well, better late than never, right? We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the city filling the air. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like myself again. Not the shattered version of me Emily had left behind, but the guy I used to be. When I finally went to bed that night, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from my lawyer, confirming that the divorce papers had been signed. It was over. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the finality of it settling over me. I thought I'd feel sad, or maybe even angry, but all I felt was relief. A clean slate, a new beginning. I closed the email and stood up, stretching as sunlight streamed through the window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was dragging a weight behind me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. The divorce papers had been signed for 2 weeks, but the finality of it still felt surreal. I hadn't heard from Emily since the documents were filed. Not directly, at least. Jake told me he'd run into one of her friends at a bar, and apparently, she was spinning some story about how I abandoned her, how she'd been the one wronged. I couldn't bring myself to care. The house sold quickly, too quickly, honestly. It felt like the universe wanted to erase every trace of that chapter of my life as fast as possible. I was fine with that. The money I got from the sale was decent, more than enough for me to start fresh somewhere else. But starting fresh didn't mean packing up and running away. No, it was about reclaiming what had been taken from me. My independence, my sense of self, my peace. The first step was small but symbolic. I got a new phone number. It wasn't just about cutting Emily off. It was about cutting off the entire version of myself that had been tied to her. No more unexpected texts or accidental voicemails. No more giving her access to the parts of me she no longer deserved. The second step was more daring. Jake and I signed up for a weekend hiking trip, a grueling 12-mile trek through rocky terrain. It wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about proving to myself that I could face challenges head-on and come out stronger. The first day was brutal. My legs burned, my back ached, and my lungs felt like they were working overtime. There were moments when I wanted to quit, to tell Jake I'd had enough and turn back. But every time I thought about giving up, I pictured Emily and Ryan in that cloakroom. I pictured the smug look on Ryan's face, the cold defiance in Emily's eyes. I wasn't going to let them win. By the time we reached the summit on the second day, the exhaustion melted away, replaced by something deeper: pride. I stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the sprawling valley below, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. Jake clapped me on the shoulder, grinning. "Told you it'd be worth it." I nodded, breathing in the crisp mountain air. "Yeah," I said quietly, "it really is." When I got back to the city, I made the third and biggest move. I rented a new apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. But it was mine. No shared memories, no ghosts of the past, just a blank canvas waiting for me to fill it. Moving in was a strangely cathartic experience. I didn't bring much with me, just a few boxes of clothes, my laptop, and some books. I left most of the furniture at the old house, not wanting to drag those memories into my new space. Instead, I took my time picking out pieces that felt like me. The first night in the new place, I sat on the floor with a frozen pizza and a beer, surrounded by unpacked boxes. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy but comforting at the same time. I stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, and realized something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. I was alone, yes, but there was a difference. Emily made one last attempt to contact me a few weeks later. She sent an email, of all things. A long, rambling message full of half-hearted apologies and excuses. "I know I hurt you, Ethan, and I'm sorry for that. But you have to understand, I felt so trapped in our marriage. I needed something different, something exciting. I never wanted to lose you, though. I hope someday we can talk and maybe even be friends." Friends. The sheer gall of it made me laugh out loud. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. Nothing she could offer that would make me give her another piece of myself. Instead, I deleted the email and blocked her address. Felt like closing a door. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, the pieces of my life started falling into place. I threw myself into work, but not in the way I had before. This time, it wasn't about distraction or escape. It was about building something for myself, something I could be proud of. I reconnected with old friends, the kind of people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been so consumed by my marriage. We went out for drinks, played pool, talked about everything and nothing. And then, one night, I met someone. Her name was Claire. She wasn't flashy or overly confident like Emily had been. She was warm, genuine, the kind of person who made you feel at ease just by being around her. We started slow. Coffee dates turned into long walks, which turned into late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. She never pried about my past, never pushed me to share more than I was ready to. And for the first time, I felt like I could be myself with someone. Looking back now, it's almost hard to believe how far I've come. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It's still there, buried deep, but it doesn't control me anymore. Emily taught me a harsh lesson about trust, about love, about the cost of giving yourself to someone who doesn't value it. But she also taught me something else: the importance of knowing your own worth. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone in my shoes, it's this: don't lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who doesn't see your value. Let them go. And when you do, you might just find something better waiting for you on the other side. The one-year anniversary of the divorce papers landing on Emily's desk came and went quietly. No dramatic reflections, no lingering sadness. Just the steady hum of a life I'd built for myself, one piece at a time. Claire and I were sitting on the patio of a little Italian restaurant downtown, splitting a bottle of wine, when the thought struck me: I was happy. Not just content, not just doing better, but genuinely, unmistakably happy. She noticed me staring and tilted her head, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "What?" "Nothing," I said, shaking my head and grinning. "Just thinking how lucky I am." Her cheeks flushed, and she laughed softly. "Well, don't jinx it. It was a joke." But her words stuck with me. Because that's the thing about happiness after heartbreak. You're always a little afraid it might slip away. But this wasn't like before. This wasn't a fragile house of cards built on grand gestures and unspoken resentments. This was real, built on trust, laughter, and the quiet comfort of knowing you're with someone who values you for who you are. After dinner, we walked through the park, the city lights shimmering in the distance. Claire slipped her hand into mine, her touch grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. "So," she said after a while, her tone playful, "are you ever going to tell me the full story about your ex?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "You don't want to hear it. It's a long, messy saga." "Try me," she said, nudging me with her shoulder. I hesitated. For months, I'd avoided diving too deeply into that part of my past, afraid it might taint the clean slate I'd found with Claire. But maybe it was time. "Well," I began, exhaling slowly. "It started with a corporate party and a cloakroom." Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, this is already good. Keep going." As I told her the story, I found myself laughing at parts that once felt like daggers to the heart. The cloakroom confrontation, the notebook, the pathetic attempts Emily made to justify herself. All of it felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. When I finished, Claire was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing lazy circles over the back of my hand. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "Yeah," I admitted, "but I wouldn't change it. Not now." Her eyes met mine, curious. "Why not?" "Because it got me here," I said simply. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "You're a good man, Ethan. She didn't deserve you." For the first time, I didn't feel the need to argue or qualify her statement. I just let it be. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still challenges. Stress at work, days when I felt the weight of the past creeping back in. But now I had the tools to face it. I'd learned how to set boundaries, how to recognize my own worth, and how to prioritize the things that truly mattered. And Emily? She became little more than a footnote in my story. A chapter I'd closed and shelved, never to revisit. I never found out what happened between her and Ryan. Whether their fling fizzled out or they stayed together didn't matter to me anymore. All I knew was that I was free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant second-guessing. One evening, months later, I got an unexpected email. It was from Emily. I stared at the subject line, "Can we talk?" For a long moment, debating whether to open it. Against my better judgment, I clicked. The message was short, almost painfully so. "Hi, Ethan. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you at the time, and I can't undo the past, but I hope you're doing well. You deserve to be happy." I sat there, rereading the words, waiting for some kind of anger or sadness to rise up in me. But it didn't. Instead, I felt nothing. Not bitterness, not resentment, just a quiet sense of closure. I didn't reply. There was no need. I closed the email, shut my laptop, and walked over to the window. The city stretched out before me, alive and full of possibilities. Claire called from the other room, asking if I wanted to watch a movie. "Be right there," I said, smiling to myself. Emily's chapter was over. My story had moved on, and for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be.